So, um, so let's talk about the title. I mentioned at the beginning that the title is not Tintern Abbey. So that's our short form for it because the actual title is much too long. Okay, so the actual title, as it appears in lyrical ballads, is lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13th, 1798. Very specific title, very specific title. So we get a lot there. We find out, let's see, what do we find out from the title? The time, so the actual date, July 13th, 1798. The place, the Wye Valley, Wales. So Tintern Abbey's just on the Wales side of that Wye River. The point of view, so he's above it, so so he has a view of the landscape. And we learn in the first lines that he's in a secluded setting, it's quiet. And we learned that he's revisiting. So there's repetition in the lines. The first lines again appears 4 times in the first 14 lines. So he's revisiting this location. So the setting I mentioned is this Cistercian monastery. Under the dissolution of the monasteries, King Henry VIII, it began to be this ruin, and it has that evocation of the sublime. So the form and language, iambic pentameter, blank verse, just like Paradise Lost, but in a more common language. It's still ornate by our standards, but in the standards of poetry of that day, in a common language. And one thing you'll notice, let's say compared to Paradise Lost, is Paradise Lost has 18 footnotes for every line on, well, this is a reference to this Greek myth, this is a reference to the Bible here, this is it assumes a very learned reader, a reader who is going to catch a lot of these echoes, or at least catch the significance of them. Here, in Wordsworth's poetry, we don't have those very learned references. Okay, so that's kind of the context. With that, let's go to the first 22 lines and get a sense of this, see how it goes. Okay, so 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. And again, I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again, do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose. Remember the again, all the 4 times in these first few lines. I'll just also back up. So 5 years have passed since the first time he was there. So he was there, say, 1793. Okay, so this poem, 1798, right? He's there 1793. We know the poet's life. He had just come back from a visit to France in early years of the Revolution, and he left someone, a lover behind. So there's a kind of a tumultuous time for him. And once again, so the sense of repetition is quite good. Once again, do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs. So the landscape's the same, but we see through the poem that he's changed. Now, what's important is his change affects the landscape, right? So the landscape in an objective sense is the same, but in a Kantian sense, because he's different, he's shaping the landscape. So he and the landscape are, what he says later, they co-create. Thoughts of more deep seclusion, so this sense of seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. So kind of a double take there is, what sound does the sky make? Is the quiet sky is kind of a redundancy. The sky doesn't make a noise. Maybe clouds in the sky would make a noise if it were storming, but the sky as such does not make that noise. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. So so he's looking out, he sees, hedgerows, he sees, which are little lines from his perspective so far away. He sees pastoral farms, but we don't really see any people. So he's so secluded, but he sees perhaps a sign of people. He sees wreaths of smoke, and he can start to surmise what might be going on there. Sent up in silence. Again, the smoke, it's redundant to say it's silent, but it's pointing out, the poetry is pointing out what we might not notice. So that's the imaginative vision, right? So you see smoke all the time. I see smoke all the time. I see sky all the time. Okay. But what I don't notice maybe is that sky is quiet, and that smoke, it's green to the wreaths of smoke sent up in silence. Yeah. So I hadn't maybe noticed that it was sent up in silence. I hadn't noticed that adds to the seclusion of the setting. Say if I were in a similar perspective. From among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods. So he doesn't see houses around. So there's vagrants are wandering around. Some hermit, we'll see, in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. So the hermit's alone, of course, because hermits, the definition of hermit. So it's, sky is silent, the smoke is silent, the hermit's alone, it's highlighting what we might not have noticed at first sight. So the first lines give us this really kind of picture. It's a picture, it's sound, it's almost the smell, like the unripe fruits and those types of things. You need to smell these things in this scene of nature. It's all these senses working to bring the reader into this kind of point of view of this imaginative, kind of like the Wanderer, that painting, right? So the Wanderer, that we as viewers are almost at the back of the Wanderer painting, seeing what the Wanderer sees. So too here, we're kind of looking over Wordsworth's shoulders to see, okay, this is this view. Let's try to take it in a tactile sense. And we're told that it underscores the silence of the situation, it's secluded, and this notion of repetition. Okay, so we'll go back here. And by the way, he said he's under a dark sycamore. Dark sycamore is a very romantic tree. It's this kind of blotchy, you see them in horror movies when it's dark, and it's kind of mysterious, because it's got that white and pale with blotchy bark, and it does have that eerie look to it, that something's going on that maybe we don't know. It evokes the imagination. Very romantic tree, so to speak. So there's politics in the title. It doesn't jump out at first, and I can't remember when I first learned this, but it really kind of made me reassess the poem, because the poem's often taken as this, as I said, this aesthetic sublimation. Well, as the slide says, this aesthetic sublimation from history. But it's there. Okay, so what does that mean? So some people will say, well, this is Wordsworth going into some secluded aesthetic vision of the romantic artist, escaping and ignoring kind of the political problems of the world that are beneath him, and he's not noticing. So what's going on with those vagrants? That smoke from the smoke from the trees, what he's not showing is that this area is becoming industrialized. It was kind of displacing small peasant farmers. It was putting the peasants who were kind of sucked up into those industries, into those kind of exploitive industries. It was, tearing up their lives. He's not showing that. He's just showing nature and his own thoughts. And so the view of that critical perspective is that it's Wordsworth's way of kind of escaping or political economic realities of England at the time. But I wonder about that, so, well, first of all, I think there are subtle references to against the French Revolution, let us say. So first of all, Burke, as I mentioned here, had spoken of monks and monasteries as a fit objects of natural piety. And so dedicating the poem to Tintern Abbey would, at this time, could be seen as an homage to Burke and a praise of the English national character, in contradistinction to what Edmund Burke's writing against, which is the reckless nature of the French Revolution. Okay. Also, the date given there is, just one second, Jerry. The date given, July 13th, is eve of Bastille Day, which started the French Revolution back in 1789. They stormed the Bastille and started the events of the French Revolution. So there's all these subtle references, I think, in the setting to the French Revolution and being critical of the French Revolution. Jerry, did you have a question, Jerry?
Yes. I just wanted to ask about the Bastille Day, and you just explained it.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
So the other topic I want to raise here is this notion of nature and the sublime. So at an area where I mentioned, rural areas are being transformed into industrial centers. This kind of return to nature is to some extent a critique of that, is a critique of kind of modern economic rationality. So the speaker speaks favorably of even memories that he had of this scene during the last 5 years when he was in city settings. So he'll say, so since the last time I came, so 5 years ago I came, and this is the first time I've been back in 5 years. But in the intervening years, times where I've been in towns and cities, I've been refreshed by thinking about this moment and about this scene. Okay, so as we'll mention later, nature has this restorative power and is opposed to the life that humans lead in cities, in industrialized cities, in modern cities, in our modern kind of economic exchanges. So those kind of the rational way in which we need to undertake our day, because that's just the way it has to be done in a common sense, reasonable fashion, are called into question. So life in the towns and the cities we find is lonely and full of din in line 25. It contains selfish people with evil tongues and rash judgments and sneers, dreary intercourse of daily life. And those are just a few. There's many other references to that. And then by contrast, what we see in nature as this overwhelming sense of awe and wonder. It's kind of the sense of the divine in encountering the natural world. And this awe and wonder evokes the sublime that we've talked about quickly. And he says in line 152, because of all this, he's a worshiper of nature. So the experience he has in nature is one of relationship to the divine. So a way of characterizing Milton's thought there would be panentheism. Okay, so So there's a subtle distinction there between the more common word is pantheism. People have probably heard that term, pantheism. So a subtle distinction between those two. So pantheism is that God is all things, okay? God is all things, or the divine is all things. They are equivalent, they are one, okay? So pantheism is that all things are God, and they are equivalent, okay? And then panentheism, so pan is all, okay? Theism is God, right? And then entheism, the N part would be in, so God in all, okay? So there's preserves an ontological distinction. So we can see God or the divine in all things, but there is a distinction. God is separate, but shows himself in all things, okay, and manifests itself in all things, okay. So because of this, because Milton sees the divine in all things, he's restored and is healed in these moments of being with nature, even, well, first of all, even if he just remembers it, but also in connecting now. So I won't read it, but in lines 23 to 50, you get this sense of, so the restoration, the healing of nature is physical and mental. It's like, so it's interestingly enough, I just heard this morning on CBC News, literally this morning, interview with a Carleton biology researcher who's just published a new study on the healing effects of natural sounds. So this is probably not totally new, but let's say, but there's new evidence undertaken by this Carleton researcher that using natural sounds only, they're apart from any other stimuli, health effects of these subjects improved as well, physically and mentally. So health indicators for both physical and mental improved. Coupled with other studies, the evidence shows that the more sense stimuli you have of the natural world, the better, right? So these subjects were only given earbuds with natural sounds of loons or whatever, right, on a lake. So if you can also smell the loons, if you can see the loons and they're right over there, and you have maybe the crisp feeling of the air on your skin, all of these, right, you're going to amplify that healing effect. So Wordsworth, and remember we talked about the first lines, when we looked at the first lines, we're getting that synesthesic, all that senses. For him, those are all important. And he, without doing the scientific research, seemed to be onto something there, that it does have a mental and physical healing effect, those sense stimulation of the natural world. There's also moral. So if you look at those lines, he says something like, it stimulates the best in us, in our best behavior, and spiritual, in the way that we talked about how he's a worshiper of nature because it leads to the divine. Okay, so nature revitalizes the mind of the speaker, but the mind is not just perceiving nature, he's half creating or inventing nature. So that's line 106. That's what I was talking about before, about this Kantian relationship to the world as object. And the poet speaker is ode to memories of this scene, this rejuvenation that we've mentioned, and this kind of we think about emotions recollected in tranquility. So that's again from the preface to Lyrical Ballads. So he says that I have said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. So the recollecting is what he's doing here in a way, right? He's recollecting moments that he had in the city, actually, where he was recollecting being there again. right? So the tranquil, the secluded scene allows him to recollect moments where he was recollecting being there before. So there's this kind of circularity there. So he says, but often lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and left and felt along the herd, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. So there's these emotions recollected in tranquility. So the poem's about nature, but it's also about the speaker's past, present, and future selves, because it's about how the speaker has related to nature in different phases. So as a boy, he was kind of this natural, not really thinking through it, relationship to nature. And then as an adolescent, he could appreciate its beauty, but didn't really see that, say, the moral or divine aspects of it. And then now he's more mature and can see that it has this moral and spiritual element to it. And so ultimately, the poem's about this sense of the passage of time is like the sonnets, the passage of time leads to kind of loss, but it also means, with that passage of time, we can come and see what he says, see the life of things. I forget what line that is, maybe around line 50. We can come to see the life of things as we have a more mature appreciation of nature and how nature is this manifestation of the divine. So I want to end there and see if there's any questions about our reading tonight, Wordsworth, or the discussion of Romanticism generally.